Only half kidding, he'll tell you he worked at every radio station in the Carolinas and was fired by all of them. All but one, the biggest, WBT. Charlie Crutchfield won a spot on the Charlotte announcing staff back in 1933. It was a dream come true for a fellow who'd been listening to the station on a crystal set he'd made from an ice cream container and some copper tennis racket strings.
I used to come up to WBT probably once every 2 months to try to get a job. But the audition was designed purposely to trip you up. One of the biggest problems I had in the early days was learning how to pronounce all these big names of the composers, Rimsky-Korsakov and Beethoven and Schubert and all these names I had to have spelled out for me phonetically.
As WBT's youngest announcer, Crutchfield worked nights. It meant receiving the station manager's messages from CBS headquarters in New York. It was a usually routine job the ambitious announcer turned to his advantage, and his first network assignment.
So this one came in from Paul White, who was head of CBS Special Events Department, and said that Bob Trout is grounded in Richmond in the fog and won't be able to announce President arrival tomorrow. Please have your best ad-lib announcer at Pier 7 in Charleston, 7 a.m. So I figured that ships were coming into the Charleston harbors all the time, so this couldn't be too important. I wouldn't bother the boss. So I simply wired back and said, we'll have an announcer in Charleston as requested. His name is Charles Crutchfield.
It was a name network brass remembered, and before long they offered him a job in New York. But Crutchfield refused. Charlotte was big enough, and the local radio shows were too much fun.
I always picked out one person and talked to that person. Usually we had a studio audience of some kind. And if I could sell that person, I could feel it.
So remember, neighbors, don't go around losing your job just because you got gray hair. Douse on some of this colorback concoction, and that gray hair will be gone before you can say Homer Briarhopper. It don't say here on the paper how it's going to get gone, but I don't imagine so many folks would be using colorback if it made your gray hair go away, roots and all.
The listeners loved it, and so did management. Crutchfield's star began to rise. He ran the radio station, and when WBTV came along, he ran that. But with new titles came new responsibilities and concerns. Concerns that network programming was at times too risque, or that news reporters were biased. Objectivity was a theme he would stress time and again, as he did in a recent speech to broadcast journalists.
Let others debate the great issues. Let others fight for the center stage of government. Let others engage in opinion and propaganda. Let others jockey for control of our planet. Your job should remain unchanged. That is, to discover and to disseminate, to observe and to report. Period.
He fired off letter after letter to CBS executives in New York, harsh salvos that were often read by News Division President Richard Salant.
I don't regret, Charles, that I couldn't agree. Think of all the fun you and I would be missing if we agreed on everything. And beyond this, Charles expressed a really inspiring and benign philosophy, which I like to think underlay all our disagreements and discussions. Charles summed it all up in a wonderful letter dated June 28, '69. Men are never so likely to settle a question rightly as when they discuss it freely. Charles is, and has been for all these many years, a genuinely great broadcaster. His eyes have always been fixed on something way above the bottom line.
He was known as a conservative and, to the very end, an ardent supporter of Richard Nixon.
Possibly my biggest personal disappointment was when I found out that President Nixon was not honest. I had great confidence in him through most of the Watergate operation. In fact, I was convinced that he was innocent, that he was being unfairly treated by the media, by the radio, television, and print media. It took me a long time to realize that the man was really dishonest, and it upset me greatly.
In recent years, he's mellowed, finding some common ground with liberal friends and deciding that government isn't always right. Charlie Crutchfield will tell you that ever-expanding federal regulations have, for him, taken the fun out of broadcast management. He worries about the threat of censorship and urges the industry to better regulate itself. But with that said, he's turning the microphones over to someone else. He'll still be around to give advice. They'll call him a consultant, and he'll be watching and he'll be listening. Charlie Crutchfield may have retired his old crystal radio, but not his fascination with the power of the airwaves to inform us and to entertain us. It's what you'd expect from a man who's been not only a leader in broadcasting, but its conscience as well. Andrew Schorr with the Carolina Camera in Charlotte.
I have the 2 volumes of our correspondence, 1961 to the present. Charles, I've titled it, and it's beautifully bound, Dear Charles, from RSS, a book of unguided missives. Enjoy him and then let Pee Wee read him.
I don't believe it.
You're going to read that whole thing and write me a lot of letters where I was wrong.
You mean you read all the cards?
I certainly did, and it was fun.
Mercy.
It was better than Dan Shor's book.
Mr. Crutchfield, when you were a little boy, some people want to be firemen, policemen, whatever. Did you want to be in broadcasting?
No, that didn't occur to me at that time. I hadn't heard of broadcasting when I was very young. My interest first started in Spartanburg when I was in high school, and used to hear WBT and KDKA up in Pittsburgh. And I did build my first receiving set. However, out of an ice cream container, one of those paper things that ice cream used to come in, and some wire and a crystal. And I bought a little headphone down at the dime store and made my first set, and I could pick up WBT on that set. So I got very interested in it.
Did you ever dream that you'd work for that station?
No, I didn't. That was the height of my ambition, though. When I finally stumbled into broadcasting, I wanted to get a job at WBT.
Why did you want to work at WBT? Was it just that memory of it coming in on the crystal set as a little boy?
No, I was quite ambitious, and all the stations I worked for, and I worked for practically every station in North and South Carolina, and was fired from all of them. But all that time, WBT was the most powerful station. We were 100 watts at 250. WBT was 5,000. It was the biggest, so I wanted to be with the biggest for some reason.
Now, when you came, of course, many years you were an announcer and you worked with all other people doing that. Did it ever occur to you that you'd be president of the company that ran the station?
No, I had no idea that I would ever be in that situation. However, I did work mighty hard. I was ambitious all my life. But actually being president of WBT in those days wouldn't have been anything to brag about, really, because it was a small station. Although it was the largest station, it was still small. And it was just the one radio station. We didn't have any separate divisions back then.
What was your goal then? What were your goals when you were younger, you were an announcer?
You know, I think I was very much like the young people today, or some of them I know. I don't believe I really knew where I wanted to fit in. I had goals. I wanted to amount to something. I wanted to make a living. And I wanted to be happy, just like the young people today. But I really didn't have any objectives, any degrees that would qualify me for announcing. One of the biggest problems I had in the early days was learning how to pronounce all these big names of the composers, Rimsky-Korsakov and Beethoven and Schubert and all these names I had to have spelled out for me phonetically by the singer before I could announce the program. And in those days, you had to, the audition was not practical at all. The purpose of the audition, and I used to come up to WBT probably once every 2 months to try to get a job. But the audition was designed purposely to trip you up. They put every big word they could think of in it.
Is there any word that you always had trouble with that sort of got in your way for a while?
I can't think of it at the moment.
It was difficult, though.
Yeah.
What was that story you were telling me about how you got your break to do something for the network?
Well, people are still wondering, some of the older folks are still wondering how I was selected to go down and announce President Roosevelt's arrival in Charleston when he came back from his goodwill tour in South America. Well, the truth is I was selected by me. Back in those days, the manager of the station left standing orders that the night announcer was not to bother him when these constant wires came in from CBS, which owned the station then. Most of them had to do with program changes and minor details for the following day. So he instructed the night man, and I was always the night man because I was the youngest announcer, to just answer the wires and leave them for the program director the next morning. So this one came in from Paul White, who was head of CBS Special Events Department. And it was addressed to Bill Shute, manager of the station, and said that Bob Trout is grounded in Richmond in the fog and won't be able to announce President arrival tomorrow. Please have your best ad-lib announcer at Pier 7 in Charleston, 7 a.m. So I figured that ships were coming into the Charleston harbors all the time, so this couldn't be too important. I wouldn't bother the boss. So I simply wired back and said, we'll have an announcer in Charleston as requested. His name is Charles Crutchfield. So I went on to 12 o'clock, signed the station off, and jumped in my car and went to Charleston. And I was there at Pier 7 in time to do the broadcast. And apparently it went pretty well because after that, Mr. White called me to New York and offered me a job in the Special Events Department, which is now the News Department.
That leads me to what I wanted to ask you next. Offers, I know there were other offers as well. What was it about your role here that made you want to remain in Charlotte?
Well, I like Charlotte. It was a good town to raise your family in. I don't know whether you've heard or not, but Charlotte was, and probably still is, the church capital of the world. I think we had at one time more churches per capita than any town in the world except Edinburgh in England. So the atmosphere was good here, the religious atmosphere. The schools were good, Queens and Davidson, and of course the other larger schools in the outer area. The town wasn't too large, wasn't too small. I was happy here, and I had friends here, and I was in New York a good bit since we were owned by CBS, and I didn't like the atmosphere. People seemed to be in too much of a hurry up there.
Now, you've had a great stake in building this community as it's grown. You were president of the Chamber of Commerce, and you've been on many, many boards and committees. What do you think the future for this community is? How is it turning out?
Oh, I think that now that we have apparently solved the initial stages of our race problem, and it was a problem back in the early days, but we went into the change of life, the race situation specifically, with minor problems, really. When you compare Charlotte with some of the larger cities, even Little Rock, Birmingham, and now Boston and Detroit and others. Well, I think we did remarkably well under the circumstances, and I give credit for that to an enormous number of people. Warner Hall, I thought, did a superb job. I think that our city council and our Merchants Association, churches all contributed immeasurably to it.
And how does that bode for the future, then?
I think well, because of course our racial our integration is here to stay, as it should be, and we I think are geared to accept it and to do all we can to make it work. And I think if both races put their shoulder to the wheel, it will work.
What's the potential for this city, then, do you think?
I think that Charlotte has probably the brightest future of any town in the southeast, including Atlanta. Atlanta is fenced in with incorporated communities, and there's just no way for Atlanta to expand within the city. It will have to expand out in the periphery area, and the tax base in Atlanta will be lower.
Charlotte can expand.
Charlotte can. Charlotte is annexing right now, and will continue to annex.
You've never regretted staying here, then?
No, not for a minute.
In your career in broadcasting, what was it that you always loved about the job? Being in front of the microphone, meeting people, what was it that just you loved doing that and you wouldn't want to do anything else?
Well, I always simply forgot about the microphone being there. And they told me we were talking to hundreds of thousands or perhaps even millions of people when you were on the network. But I always picked out one person and talked to that person. Usually we had a studio audience of some kind. And if I could sell that person, I could feel it. And if I could sell that person, then I was successfully selling the audience, I felt. Anyhow, it worked out that way, and we had some very successful shows back in those days.
Mm-hmm. And the one last thing I wanted to ask you is, looking back on your long career in broadcasting, do you ever have any regrets that that's where you've spent so many years of your life?
None whatsoever. It's been a real pleasure. It's getting a little complicated now, but I have no regrets at all. I have very pleasant memories of it. As a matter of fact, I think if I were a young man today, I know there's nothing in the world that would be more attractive to me than going into television in particular. Radio to a lesser degree, I guess. But television has such a tremendous future at the present time. I've been reading a great deal about the technological things on the horizon, some of which will be here within the next 2 to 3 years. things like fiber optics, what we'll do, satellite broadcasting. I think in the area of satellite broadcasting, we have experienced for the first time the real, true, significant potential of it. This was done when Walter Cronkite was interviewing the two leaders in the Middle East. And really, I think Walter probably is given credit today of bringing these two men together. By satellite, you bring people together. You force an understanding. We're not people with horns anymore.
The world is getting smaller, though, and I guess just like broadcasting has always been, even in a smaller respect, it's where it's at, I guess.
Yeah. I think broadcasting will play a tremendous role in that.
And so you've never regretted being a part of it in its development?
Not at all. I've enjoyed it thoroughly, and I look back on it with a great deal of satisfaction.
You'll miss it, I guess.
Well, I'll miss it, but I will still be around the periphery edges because part of my plans for the future include broadcasting, various phases of broadcasting.
There's one thing you told me on tape that I did want to get on film, and that we had talked about disappointments before. And I wonder if just briefly you could tell me what was your disappointment related to the political world you were telling me about?
Well, I think my biggest disappointment politically, and possibly my biggest personal disappointment, was when I found out that President Nixon was not honest. I had great confidence in him. I felt that he was particularly proficient in the field of international relations, something that is vitally important to us.
But you believed in him all along.
I did believe in him, and I had great confidence in him through most of the Watergate operation. In fact, I was convinced that he was innocent, that he was being unfairly treated by the media, by the radio, television, and print media. It took me a long time to realize that the man was really dishonest, and it upset me greatly.
In your years as head of a major broadcasting company, it's often been written about you that you've been someone who's been quick to speak out and often challenge the policies of the network, some things that were being broadcast nationally, some things you thought maybe you were reluctant to have broadcast on your stations. Why did you feel compelled to speak out in that way? There were other people running other stations around the country who just sort of went along as an affiliate. You never really did. Why?
I think the reason I did is because I feel very keenly that we as operators have a responsibility to our viewers and our listeners to operate in what the Commission calls the public interest. And when we see things that we think are too risque or that depict violence for the sake of violence rather than just for historical significance, I think it behooves us to scream about it and beat on the desk and yell on the telephone. And I think too many broadcasters are prone to leave well enough alone, not rock the boat. And I think that's one reason that we as an industry are in bad shape right now. By bad shape, I mean that I feel that unless we ourselves do something to correct our faults, and there are many, and they are increasing nightly if you watch the tube, I think the public, through the Congress, will control our industry for us. I think we'll have total censorship, for one thing. And this just frightens me to death. I can conceive of nothing worse than government deciding what the public is to see. So I think the criticism that is leveled at broadcasting today. Some of it is crackpot in nature, but a lot of it, I dare say a majority of it, is justified. It's our fault. I have seen this coming for years and years, and many other broadcasters have. Unfortunately, not enough have made their voices loud enough. I've had some real fights with CBS over the years. I have great respect for them as businessmen, as operators. They have their problems. But I think the ultimate problem for all of us in broadcasting is what will the viewer think when he sees it? What will the viewer's daughter or his wife think when she sees it in her living room? It's not like the movies. If you go to the movies and an X-rated trailer comes up, or the picture's a little more explicit than you thought it was, you did pay to go in. It was your choice. But if you were sitting in your living room at home, looking at Bambi or some Walt Disney movie, and then Sonny and Cher come on with practically no clothes on Cher, and then if Archie Bunker lets go with something that's shocking, this is different. I don't think we have the right in television to invade the privacy of the living rooms of America with some of the stuff that we're pumping in there now.
Okay, let me ask you this. Do you think that how would you rate the television industry, the broadcasting industry, in realizing the potential of the medium?
Compared to what?
Well, you know, they talk about it being such a great informational, educational tool, a great uplifting factor that it could be in our country. Is it pulling standards down? Is it raising them up? Is it just somewhere in between?
I think as a news medium, I think broadcasting is doing a remarkable job. Some of the news is not as good as, or not done as well as other. On the other hand, it's a type information, it's an immediacy, it's an intimacy that we have never been exposed to in America. I think it's something that the print media cannot possibly do.
Well, let me put it this way, Mr. Crutchfield. You've seen broadcasting grow and develop and all kinds of new technology come and a lot of potential with it. How far have we come to doing the job that we should do for this country?
Well, I think we've come an awfully long way in a very short time, relatively speaking. I still feel, though, that public television is doing some things that commercial television could and should be doing. We help public television, we assist them, but I think that in the field of education, we miss some wonderful opportunities with all the money we have to spend in programming. We are, however, essentially a news and entertainment medium. We in commercial television are not an educational medium per se. But I do feel that we miss a lot of opportunities. For example, television at its best, in my opinion, commercial television, is the 60 Minutes show. I think this is beautifully done. And it's not really educational, yet it is.
Let me just interrupt and ask you something specific. We know that you've had many accomplishments over your years in broadcasting and personally. What has been the thing, though, that has most frustrated you? Maybe where Charles Crutchfield has failed or not achieved an accomplishment that you wanted, or maybe not for yourself even, but for your industry or for others, something that you just didn't quite reach.
That's a hard one to answer. I really, biggest constant frustration I have is government regulation. This business is not fun anymore at the management level. Government agencies have dumped piles and piles of regulation upon us. I think they're really strangling not only broadcasting, but every other enterprise. And I don't know whose fault it is. It's not the administration. It's really not the Congress. The agencies themselves evolve rules that aren't there. The Congress passes laws, and then the agencies give the laws such interpretation that you would never recognize them. So, from a management standpoint, the biggest frustration, I think, is government regulation, which is continuing to grow and apparently will continue. Personally, I don't know that there are any great frustrations, really. I know the thing that I've enjoyed most in my career is watching young people come along and helping these young people as I was helped when I was beginning and along the way. This is a young folks' business. It's not for old fogies. And you have to be young and flexible to do what is demanded. So I think this is the hope of our industry also.
Okay, now, what's in the future for Charles Crutchfield?
Well, I have orders from my wife to stay out of the house, for one thing. So I have an office. I haven't occupied it yet, but I have it. I intend to do some teaching. Already I'm negotiating with respect to that. This will be in the area of communication and business administration. There again, I'll have an opportunity to get to know and work with young folks, which I'll enjoy thoroughly.
You'll miss broadcasting now, won't you?
Well, I will do some brokerage work, buying and selling television stations. That will give me an opportunity to get around the country, keep contact. And then I'm going to do some work in cooperation with Doug Mays in the field of training business executives to talk with news reporters.
Okay.
Which I think will be useful. The average business executive has no idea what the reporter wants or what makes him tick. And I think maybe Doug does, and maybe I can learn, and so we're going to that field.
Looking back on your years in broadcasting, a lifetime in broadcasting, how fulfilling has it been?
Oh, very. I can think of no business at all that if I were a young man today and had an opportunity to go into broadcasting or